Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. A warm welcome. It's me, Bill. And boy, we had a small computer glitch, and now we're all out of it. So here I am, and I'm live today with Pastor Greg Koukl. We're going to bring him on the program in just a minute. Is he ready yet, Wyatt?
Well, let me find out
here.
Hey,
Greg, are you there? I think he's getting close to being there. Hey, Greg. All right. I think he's probably muted. I see his charming face on the screen, but I don't. I know I can't hear him yet. Do you unmute your mic?
Here we go.
Oh, there
Rock
you are.
Roll.
Good to see you. Sorry about the technicality, but I'm glad you're here. And
yeah, thank you, Bill.
Yeah, and I just was wanting to tell the listeners today that we're going to talk about your work and apologetics and evangelism. It's one of my favorite topics. So when it comes to this, I'm ready to go all the time.
So am I. One of my favorite topics too. Thanks, Bill.
And you've founded Stand to Reason in '93, and I know you've spoken on over 90 university campuses, and I know you did that in 4 days. So congratulations. I've never heard of anyone that could cover 90 campuses in 4 days.
Yeah, I was tired after that.
No doubt. Well, one of the things I wanted to start with you today is to engage, we need to pay attention on some multiple levels. We need to pursue intellectual needs. I know we need to pursue some emotional needs and some very practical needs as well. When you do your work and you start to approach Columbo style anybody, where do you lead off? What area do you go for first?
Well, in my situation, Bill, I just respond to the circumstances that are before me. If talking about evangelism now, I'm dealing just whatever I confront. Like most of your listeners, aren't involved in doing evangelistic presentations where you give a talk before a university audience or something like I've done, and that sets up the circumstances of your communication, the content of your talk, and then you have Q&A afterwards. Most people are just kind of, grooving through life and being open to opportunities that God gives them, and then they get into conversations as they're able. And I generally will start with a question. You know this from when we've talked about this in the past, the tactical approach. I call it the Columbo tactic, from Lieutenant Columbo of TV fame, that just kind of scratches his head and, hey, it's something about this thing that bothers me, and so then raises questions. Found that to be a really effective way of moving forward. So when I'm involved in a circumstance where I think I might be able to have a spiritual conversation of some sort, whether it's at a restaurant or on an airplane or, wherever it happens to be, somebody comes over to do some work in my house, then I'm looking for an opportunity to maybe ask a question of that person that will open them up a little bit to feed back to me details that will help me to know where to go further.
Okay.
In the tactics book, for example, a well-known illustration is the witch in Wisconsin, who was helping process some film, which nobody knows what that is anymore, right? And at a kiosk, and she was wearing a pentagram, a 5-pointed star around her neck, which is often an occultic symbol, especially if it's jewelry. Right. And this was a big one, so it looked like a statement. And she turned out to be a witch. A pagan is the way she characterized it. And then I asked her if she is Wiccan, and she said yes. But the key thing is the way I opened the conversation. I just said, does that jewelry have any religious significance to you?
Oh, great
and she
question.
said, yes, Yeah, yes, it does. The 5 points stand for earth, wind, fire, water, and spirit. And then I'm a pagan, And oh, well, as she's talking a little bit more about it, I realized it sounded like witchcraft to me. So I just asked her, "Are you Wiccan?" And she said, yes. Now, notice how that conversation started because I saw this jewelry that looked like it had spiritual significance to her, and I just asked her about it. Sometimes I'll ask people about their tattoos or something like that, maybe because people wear tattoos as a display of something, their ideas, their beliefs, their something personal to them. And I've never had anybody ever object to me asking about their tats. Hey, what's up with the tat? This is very interesting to me. And so that may be an entree into a conversation. Sometimes I'm on an airplane and people say, well, I say hi, and we're making small talk and I'm drawing them out a little bit. And then they say, so where are you headed? Are you headed home or are you going to work? I said, yeah, I'm headed. Well, what do you do? Well, I'm a writer and I'm a speaker. Now, of course, that for most people, that is curious, because that's not the ordinary deal, that they run into. And so they want to, oh, really? Well, what do you write and speak about? And now I get a chance to say something about what I do. And if I'm saying they'll talk for a few minutes about it, I said, well, what are your personal convictions about those things? And that's a very kind of simple question to ask. And they can answer it or not. Usually they answer it. Sometimes they'll say, well, I'm a Christian too. Other times they'll say, well, I don't know what to believe. And then I'll say, why is that? Very simple, very conversational, not confrontational. And that's what ends up moving us into a spiritual conversation. So for me, I'm trying to adapt to the circumstances. Bill, Jesus said, or make it, the Apostle Paul said in Colossians chapter 4, he said, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. All right. Then he goes on to say, let your speech be with grace, so you know how to respond to each person. So he says, be smart. And then he says, be nice. And then he says, essentially, be tactical, responding to each person, which is the unique individual and the unique set of circumstances that you're in. And so I just kind of flow with it. Sometimes there doesn't seem to be any opening for me. I'm not the kind of person that would force an opening. Some people are very aggressive like that, and that's fine. It's just not my personality. I'm trying to find some context or pretext to use as a springboard into a conversation to make it seem a little bit more natural. That's the way I approach it.
Greg, why do you think people feel so vulnerable when they ask questions? You made it sound so easy, asking questions. It sounds so simple and so inviting. But for many, it makes them feel very vulnerable. Like, what if they come at me with like this intensity that you're not one of those guys, are you?
It's this is an odd question for me. I'm not denying it happens, but the reason that it's odd is because, and the sequel to Tactics called Street Smarts, I have a whole chapter in there titled "Questions Keep You Safe." Questions keep you safe. So for the Christian, I just want your listeners to think about this. They either have, if they're going to engage, they can either make a statement or ask a question. I mean, broadly put, that's the two options you have. If you make a statement, that leaves you vulnerable for attack. Because
I agree.
if it's controversial, people say, you're wrong, or no, it's not, or you're bigoted, or you're arrogant, or whatever. But if you're asking a question that's a sincere question of another person to get their information about what you're asking, well, what's threatening about that to the other person? You're showing an interest in them. You're showing, you're gathering information in your own mind, maybe for further conversation, but it's also an opportunity for you to figure out whether there's going to be a further conversation. And I remember one guy reading a book about, it was a new agey kind of book. And so I asked him about it. And I said, do they ever quote Jesus in there? I'm talking with him, asking him if did they ever quote Jesus? Well, yeah, of course they do. Then I said, well, have you ever read Jesus for yourself? Now, I asked that question because books that quote Jesus often quote him out of context and imply that he means something consistent with the author that isn't consistent with Jesus when you look at the larger teaching of Jesus. So but then he got kind of annoyed. He said, "What do you mean, did I ever read Jesus? I mean, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you read Jesus, what Jesus actually said." No, 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 I don't. And then he waves me off, and I realize, okay, that's the end of this conversation, because he didn't show
Right.
any interest at all. So I said, okay, that's all right. It wasn't really awkward, but it was clear that he didn't want to go any further. So I didn't go further. But I don't think he was bugged because I was asking questions. He just didn't want to go there. And so that's another advantage to this kind of approach, Bill. You actually are much safer asking questions, much less vulnerable than if you make statements. You make statements, and they can come back at you. And if you're asking questions, that buys you time because now the other person is talking. And I haven't talked to anybody, honestly. I mean, maybe in all these years I've been doing this, there's been a couple, but characteristically, people are happy to talk about themselves.
That's so
Their
true.
ideas, their views, and stuff like that. So I haven't run into that problem, Bill.
Yeah. I ran into someone at the grocery store over the weekend, and I was chatting briefly, and he said something about, well, the Bible, I read that cover to cover. I read it cover to cover when I was 15, as if to suggest, 60 years ago, you read this book cover to cover, and now it's all done. You've got it all figured out.
Yeah.
What would you have said to that?
Well, I would have asked him. Well, he said when I was 50, he must have been my age, 75.
He's 75. Yeah.
Okay. And he said he read at 15.
When he was 15.
So,
yeah.
Okay. And then I might have said, okay, I'm glad. Okay, good. So what came of that? And I'm wondering, he's also implying something by that. Well, I already read it.
Right.
So what is it that I'm supposed to infer from his implication? And I don't know. So I'm going to ask him, okay, well, good. I'm glad you did that. I might say, like I mentioned, what was the consequence? What came of it? Did you understand what you read? Here's another question. And listen, even as it doesn't matter what age you are, if you start at the beginning of Genesis and go all the way to the book of Revelation, there's going to be tons that you don't understand.
Yeah.
Still is for me after 52 years of this.
Amen.
Yeah, so I might ask that question, or I might ask, so I'm not sure why you're telling me this, why you're telling me that 60 years ago you read the Bible cover to cover.
Yeah.
And what are you getting at? And I'd want to do that I'd be careful not to sound like I was attacking or anything like that. I'm curious. I'm not sure why. Maybe he's saying, been there, done that.
That's what I think the message he was sending.
All right. But see, I'd want to be more precise. Rather, I'd want him to be more precise. I want to make sure I was understanding. And so then if he said that, well, been there, done that. I've already tried that out. Wait, because you read the Bible when you're 15, does that mean you tried out Christianity? Is that what you're saying? You're chuckling because you and I know both that that's not the same thing.
Of course, right.
Or I might say, okay, what did you think about? What we're getting from this little section of our interview here, Bill, is that with one thing a person says, there are a multitude of different questions you could ask for further clarification. That's the takeaway, I think, from this one. And it just seems how I would be struck at the moment, in my conversation with him, in what I pick up in the vibe, so to speak, if he's just dismissive or whatever, that will determine where I think my next question will take me. And then we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, I basically said, well, that was a good start 60 years ago, and I would invite you to maybe just get through one of the four Gospels. And just reread and take it slow.
Let me jump in here, Bill, if you could, I could. You just made a statement. When you make a statement, that puts you at a disadvantage.
Okay.
Because now you're instructing him about what he should do, and that he could take umbrage at.
Okay.
So here's the variation. Since Christianity, hey, Fred, I'm just going to call him Fred. Hey, Fred, since Christianity is about Jesus, have you ever read carefully the accounts in Jesus' life. Recently, have you recently, as an adult, as a grown-up? Oh, no, I haven't. Well, do you think that could make a difference in the way you view Christianity if now as a grown-up you're reading what Jesus said? Do you think you'd understand it better as a grown-up than as a teenager? Notice these are all questions, but what am I doing? I'm channeling him towards the Gospels.
Yeah, you're just a much nicer person than I am.
No, you're probably even nicer than I am, but tactically, it's better to every time you can use a question rather than make an assertion or make a recommendation. And by the way, your recommendation wasn't a bad one, but if you can use a question rather than make the recommendation and use the question to get to the recommendation, that's going to be more effective.
Yeah.
That's my point.
That's why I love having you on the show. Greg Koukl is my guest. If you have a question or comment, send it over 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. It is my deepest desire that you take the very first step of faith by placing your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. If you've got questions about what it means to begin a relationship with Jesus, text the word faith to 41224. I'm back with Greg Koukl. He is at Stand to Reason, str.org, str.org. I have been a fan of Greg's for a long time, and his thinking is brilliant. And you've already coached me, Greg. You have reminded me to keep soft and gentle and invitational. There is a part of me that I think got a little bit, you should. I sensed a little of his arrogance, like, hey, I read that when I was 15 cover to cover.
No, look, I do the same thing. So this is not a chastisement, but because I have to remind myself, oh, man, I made a statement. I could have asked this question. It would have been better. But I just want to be the most effective and your people to be most effective. And the more they can resort to questions rather than statements or anything else like that, the more effective they're going to be. And it's easier that it'll be. So there you go. It's all part of a process.
Yeah. So if someone sat next to you on a plane and you said you were a speaker and an author and you got a little bit more into the content of what you do, and they said, well, what do you think is the most compelling reason that you believe Christianity is true? I mean, what about all the people in India? I mean, you're telling me they're not going to heaven? What's up with that?
Well, there's a couple of things that you've asked there. So there's a complexity of questions built into what you just said. So I'll just role play it. Well, so I'm in my role play now. You're Fred again. Okay. So, Well, Fred, there's a couple of things there that are important, but let me answer the first one. And that is, why do I think Christianity is true? Look, my daughter, she's 20, almost 21 now, but when she was 8 years old, she said to me, Papa, how do we know that God is true? That's the way she put it. And that's the same question you're asking right now, Fred. And so I thought about it for a minute, and this phrase popped into my mind, and I thought this really captures it. I said, honey, the reason that we believe God is true, and this is the whole package of theology that we were passing on to her with Christianity. The reason that we believe it's true is because it's the best explanation for the way things are. It's the best explanation for the way things are. So now you just mentioned the people in India. Do you know what people in India believe, what their religion is?
Well, it's not Christianity, but I mean, don't all roads just get to lead to heaven?
Well, their belief is Hinduism, and their view is, it's a variation of what you just said, it's all roads lead to Hinduism. So they hold that their view is the only true view also, but they can incorporate Jesus into it because it's going to help you to get to a kind of a cosmic consciousness state of mind where you lose yourself into nirvana and into God, like a drop of water falls into the ocean and just dissipates there. That's their view. Now, it turns out on their view, the world is an illusion. Everything, including us, is an illusion. Now, I just want to ask you, Fred, does it make sense to you that you don't really exist?
No.
Because that's what it amounts to. So would that be compelling to you? If somebody said, here's our view, you don't really exist, nor do I, nor anything particular. The only thing that exists is God. Would that be compelling to you?
Mm.
Well, it's not compelling to me. I
No.
take your grunt to be, no, it's not compelling
No,
to
it's
you.
not.
So, and notice we're still in the role play here,
Yeah.
Fred. So that's just an example. I think what Christianity does is tells us the world is real, that I'm real, and God is real, and I'm not God. By the way, that makes more sense to most people. There is a God maybe, but I'm not him. If people are saying, is there a God, or I don't believe in God, then they agree that they're not him one way or another. So this is just an example of what I was saying earlier, Fred, that I think that Christianity is the best explanation of the way things are. And I just touched on one thing as it contrasts to the people in India.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. See how I kind of worked with some things that I already knew about Hinduism, but I asked some questions and engaged you to be participating in the conversation, so that, and even got your affirmation of how, well, that doesn't sound right, that we're all, Maya is the word they use,
Mm-hmm.
part of the illusion, and we all have to kind of get back to the Godhead and kind of thing. But anyway, so there's an example.
One of the first things, Greg, that made it feel so interesting to me is you listened to my questions and you affirmed me. It's like, well, you've asked 2 questions, and I'd like to deal with each one. It's like, wow, this guy's really listening to what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. You're not just waiting for me to stop talking so you can start talking.
That's a real important part of this approach. But I still have that impulse because I'm like anybody else. I want to, like teachers, people who have teaching capabilities, they want to tell everybody everything they know. I mean, it's just kind of their deal, and they got to fight against it. And so sometimes I might be tempted, and sometimes do, just answer the question when it would have been better for me if I had taken a little different tack like I did with you, and at the opportunities that I had to ask a question that helps move the whole thing along.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking about my grocery store exchange, thinking I could have said, what would it take for you to reconsider going back and reading the Bible again? Would you reconsider that?
Yeah.
Well, any person would say, I'd reconsider that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe or maybe not. How about if you offered this too? Do you think you had a good grasp of everything the Bible taught when you read it at 15?
Oh, well, he did sort of complain that it was hard to understand, but he read it cover to cover.
Do you think it would be easier for you to understand now as a grown man with a lot of background and lots of things, a lot of education, blah, blah, blah? Well, yeah. So what would it take you? Now your question.
Yeah.
So you notice I added a couple of steps in there.
Yeah, you did.
To ramp up into that it might help him to think it's smart to reconsider reading the Bible. But he might just say, no, I'm not interested. All right. Well, you've done what you could do.
Yeah.
Now, if you said, I'm not interested, I may say, last question, I'm just curious. I won't push back on this, but why is it that you're not interested? Okay, here's the deal. If I do that, if I say last question, I'm not going to push back. I am curious, though, why aren't you interested?
Mm-hmm.
You got to keep your word.
No, I agree.
Unless he invites you back in.
Yeah.
If he said, look, because I don't think anything about is true, that God isn't true or God isn't real or whatever. Why do you think that God is real? Oh, now he's just invited you back in.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
But at least it gives you a final salvo there that may invite more conversation on the one hand, or will just give you more information about why he's not interested. And so, I mean, these kind of encounters are educational encounters. I encourage people, if you're just starting out using questions, just think about being a student of the other person's view. Don't even think about communicating your view right off if you're not comfortable. And just find out, what do you believe and why do you believe it? Those are the 2 basic things. What do you mean by that? And what are your reasons for that? How did you come to that conclusion? That's a great place to start, and you're totally in student mode. You're not in persuasive mode at all. And so that allows you to get a feeling for the field, so to speak. So my daughter and I, she's 17 and she's saved $4,000 at her work, and she wants to buy a car. Okay, so I said, okay, we're going to go out to a little used car lot in town here where people park their cars, and we're not going to buy a car today, honey. Here's what we're going to do is we're going to find out what the market is. So in these cars that were like 10, 12, 14 years old, virtually every one of them had 150,000 miles, and they were asking $6,600. Okay. Okay. What does she know now? She knows that's the market right now,
Right.
at least that little slice. So there's information that we were able to gain that helps us to know what to expect in the future. Now, the same thing is true here. When we just ask questions and get other people's point of view, we're going to find out what their objections are and why they have them. We did a training, a tactics training at University of Minnesota and right there in Minneapolis one year, and we sent afterwards, in the late afternoon, we sent the students out on the campus to talk with students with a questionnaire, whatever. And some of the people at the conference were mortified about doing that. But when they got back, one woman said she feared going out on campus more than she feared childbirth again. That's pretty big. But when she went out armed with the tools that we had given her, she said two things. She had two observations. She said, they're not as scary as I thought. Well, that's pretty good. They're not as scary as I thought. And of course, this is true of a lot of people. They're scary when they're strangers. They're off out there, and you imagine they're giants in the land, But when you start talking to them, you realize they're just ordinary people. Okay, so that's the first observation. Here's the second observation, Bill. She said, they're not as smart as I thought either. Isn't that something?
Yeah,
they're not as smart as I thought. Now, it doesn't mean they're dumb, but she had been over-exaggerating in her own mind the kinds of challenges that they would offer her and the alternate points of view that would be so well defended by them. Nonsense. She said they weren't even, a lot of them weren't even, they were dumb, the answers that they gave, the reasons that they gave. She could see right through them. Now, I'm not saying everybody's dumb. That's not, but the ideas sometimes are silly. And people, hold to them very strongly. And by going out and being a student of other people's views, that was a lesson that she had learned that day on campus.
So interesting. Greg Koukl is my guest. He's at standtoreason.org, STR.org. If you have a question or comment as we continue our discussion today on apologetics and evangelism, you can send it over 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. Welcome to the show. Greg Koukl is my guest. He's at standtoreason.org. And Greg, now Wyatt's starting to call me Fred, so I got all kinds of trouble. So we're just going to leave it at that. All right, Greg, here's another.
Well, it helps people know when I'm still in the role play.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the idea there.
So here's another situation with a friend of mine. He was very busy with ministry much of his life, and then drifted apart the way friends do over time, and you reconnect, and, well, I don't really believe in God anymore. I'm going, what? And, as I look at science and everything else and blah, 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 I go, well, wait a minute. You were a leader of a ministry and led all kinds of people to Christ, and now you're turning your back on this and acting like you're smarter than the God of the Bible that you taught and preached all these years. I was scratching my head. I didn't know what to say other than, oh boy, that's.
Was that, by the way, Bill? Was that what you said to him, or that's what you were thinking?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, but
because that wouldn't be a good thing to say to him.
No.
It wouldn't get you off on a good foot.
Yeah.
But
this is an open
right.
ticket. I mean, I know I'm going back probably this week again to go back into the conversation.
Sure.
And so I'd love some coaching on this one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So my question right off the bat would be, Fred, okay, well, this is surprising. What happened?
Well,
then he says, apparently you told me something about science and whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I'd want more detail.
Yeah.
But you've gotten that detail, correct?
I have, yep.
Okay. So I'm curious, Fred, what did you learn about science that showed you that God didn't exist?
Okay.
I don't know what he'd say,
Mm-hmm.
but science measures the physical realm. It doesn't measure the material realm. There is no argument from science per se. And I'm thinking from not what scientists say, because scientists are driven by certain philosophies. That's different. But what is it that science says? Science is a methodology to examine the physical world and find out facts about the physical world, regularities. Okay, and then we can use those things we learn for our benefit. Great. Actually, it was a bunch of Christians that were founders of the whole scientific enterprise,
Mm-hmm.
and I've actually written about that in the book Street Smarts, but which is a follow up to the tactics book. But I'm just going to ask him, well, what is it that you learned from science that you think inveighs against the existence of God? Now, I want to hear what that is.
Right.
Because I can't see what he can tell me. Well, science has told us a lot of things that the ancients thought gods were responsible for, and now we know that nature is responsible. So people thought, oh, thunder, that's the gods bowling. No,
Right.
it's not. It's the electro blah, blah, blah
Right.
thing
Right.
going on, whatever. So now we have a naturalistic explanation for that. Okay, Fred, I got it. You're right about that. I still don't see how that invades it. Now we know one thing that happens that is not divinely caused. And by the way, it's curious that people have to go back to like the gods are bowling in order to make that kind of point. But so how is that inveigh against the existence of God altogether? Well, the laws of nature explain everything. Really, what explains the law of nature?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a question.
Yeah, I like that.
Laws of nature don't explain everything. I could go another way, but if I say, okay, what explains the laws of nature? The universe is kind of like a machine that works a certain way, and that you call it the laws of nature, Fred, right? Okay. Well, who made that machine to work a certain way? Well, see, they don't have an answer to that because their answer is no one. You mean this highly tuned machine that works in a very precise way, in such a way that you can predict outcomes if you set things up, your dominoes up in the same row. All of that is where did that come from? Oh, it's the Big Bang. Okay. What banged the Big Bang?
Right. Right.
Did the Big Bang bang itself?
Yeah.
Okay, so those are questions that are going to the kinds of things that are foundational. So I'm off the role play now. Those are the kinds of questions that go to the kinds of things that are foundational to the scientific enterprise,
Mm-hmm.
like the laws of nature or laws of reason, logic. That all has to be in play before science can even be working. And other things like that, the basic reliability of our senses to understand truth about the world, all these things have to be in place that have to be explained apart from science. Science doesn't explain those. Science requires those before it can work. And then there are a bunch of very important things that science, even in principle, can't explain. It can't explain where the natural world came from, because you have to have the natural world first before empirical methods can be applied in science. So who banged the Big Bang, or what banged the Big Bang?
Mm-hmm.
What caused that? It's either something or nothing.
Yeah.
Those are your only two options. And I'll tell you what, nothing is not the odds-on favorite right here.
Right.
What caused the origin of life? First, you got all dead stuff, then you got living stuff. Well, that is a huge jump.
That's the biggest jump ever.
Yeah, nobody knows. Nobody knows. How
Yeah.
do you get consciousness out of matter? You keep, shaking up molecules in a box. You're not going to suddenly get conscious minds popping out of that,
Right?
Because consciousness is different than matter.
Yeah. Let me throw.
Okay, so
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say I'm giving some examples of the kinds of things that even in principle science can't address. It's not capable of addressing that, but are huge features of the world that we experience. So I'm going to want to, how do you explain that, Fred? I know science is great. I'm all for science. Okay, but it doesn't explain a whole bunch of stuff, and science doesn't even explain science.
Good point.
So,
Let me
what
throw,
say you, Fred?
yeah,
Kind of thing.
let me throw two other factors in. My health has gotten bad, and my wife left me. So this whole God thing is collapsing around me, including I believe in science. This other things have happened too, and
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just feeling like, what's the point?
Okay. So, well, Fred, I'm staying in the
Yeah,
role play, Fred.
stay in the role play.
Now I'm confused because, so you're sick, your body's falling apart. Guess what? So is mine. So is everybody's, especially as they get older, their bodies fall apart. How I'm trying to make the connection between bodies falling apart over time and
Hmm.
God not existing. I don't see the link there between the two. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. Now
So
yeah,
so
yeah.
notice how he's presuming based on the way you constructed this, Bill. Now, Fred is presuming that since his body's not working as well as it used to be, that this is somehow evidence against God, but I don't see what that is. So I want him to spell that out.
Hmm.
And by the way, the same kind of thing applies to a different type of problem we experience. Now we're experiencing heartache. Now we're experiencing tragedy in our lives. My marriage failed. Therefore, God doesn't exist? Help me out here, Fred. I don't see that.
Hmm. I think
Because
there's
you could say, or the Christian could say, my marriage is doing great, therefore God does exist.
right. I think there's
So,
rebellion against the Christian community because life isn't the fairy book he thought it would be.
okay. Well, that would be something you'd find out by asking him more questions. But if he was told as a Christian that it would be a fairy book experience, I just have a couple of observations. The book of Hebrews was written to suffering Christians.
Hmm.
The book of First Thessalonians was written to suffering Christians. The book of Second Thessalonians written to suffering Christians. The book of First Peter was written to suffering Christians. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Second Timothy at least were written by Paul when he was in prison. Now, do you think, Fred, this conveys a fairy book perspective on Christianity?
Yeah. Yeah.
So some people have, Bill, some people have I keep switching my hats here, so I'm using
That's
Bill and Fred there to identify that.
yeah.
But I think some people have just an inaccurate view of Christianity because it's been passed on to them inaccurate, and Jesus, in fact, says, "In this world you will have tribulation." Paul says that everyone who desires to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. That's Second Timothy. That thing from Jesus is in John, I think, 17. Then you have Peter in First Peter, 4, saying, "Why are you so surprised at this fiery ordeal amongst you, as if something strange were happening to you?" So the combined witness, the consistent witness in the New Testament is not that things are going to be rosy, but they're going to be hard. And
Yeah.
so I would apologize to your friend. I'm sorry that you were given the wrong impression. Actually, what you're experiencing is exactly what the New Testament tells you to expect.
Hmm.
So it's consistent with Christianity. It's not inconsistent with it.
Yeah. So many pages of scripture has a suffering person talking about their suffering.
Mm-hmm. Wait, say that again for me.
There are so many pages in scripture where a suffering person is talking about their suffering.
Yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
this is why it's unfortunate that in many churches they have what I would call an overly triumphal view of Christianity, and they apply that to physical circumstances. Everything's going to be great, man. We're
Yeah.
Christians, no problems, everything's wonderful. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. Well, that is not the way it works. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, towards the end of the chapter, momentary light affliction. Now he says momentary light. This is like an understatement because Paul was whipped 39 lashes 4 times. He was beaten with rods 3 times. He was shipwrecked twice, and he was stoned once. That would be like with stones, trying to kill him, execute him. So he didn't have light affliction, but he was comparing it to eternity. And that's what he talks about in that passage. So even looking at the most famous Christian who ever lived, Saul of Tarsus, Paul the Apostle, he experienced all kinds of difficulty.
Yeah.
And we should take note of that. So if we are going to leave Christ because hardship in our life, that must be because we think hardship in our life is inconsistent with the truth of Christianity. But it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
It's completely consistent. It's what we are told to expect.
Greg, let me take a break. During the break, look up Hebrews 11, start reading in verse 36. I mean, there's, again, another illustration. Greg Koukl is my guest. If you have a question or comment, 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. Welcome is a word said universally all over the world. Every language on the planet has their own way of making a friendly greeting. At Faith Radio, when we welcome, we really mean it. Learn more about us by requesting a free welcome pack gift. Text the word welcome to 877-933-2484 or visit myfaithradio.com to request your welcome pack today. And a warm welcome to you. My guest today is Greg Koukl. We're talking about evangelism and apologetics, one of my favorite topics, and I think Greg's too. He's written a number of books. You can check them out anywhere. He spells his last name Koukl, Koukl. So we were just talking about suffering, and in Hebrews 11, you probably looked at those verses, but I mean, this didn't turn out very well for these people.
Well, verse 36 starts out, and others. And this is a break in the continuity there, because first he's talking about all of these people who by faith succeeded and, got their promises fulfilled and their prayers answered and all these other things. And then it says, and others were tortured, not accepting their release. And now here's a kind of an unusual phrase, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Verse 36, and others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. That was probably Ezekiel. They were tempted. They were put to death with a sword. They went about in sheepskin, goatskins, etc. Like these guys had a bad lot. So here the writer of Hebrews is making it clear that faith results in two different things, either deliverance or not. In other words, God is not guaranteed that we're going to be delivered, but it's interesting the way the writer puts it here. He says that those who are not delivered but have to suffer are actually going to experience a better resurrection, a better resurrection. Now, in 1 Timothy, Paul talks about godliness being, he says, pumping iron, physical exercise has some profit, but godliness is a means of great gain, for it offers a promise not just for this life, but also for the life to come. And the point there is that as we persevere to develop our godliness, and part of that is persevering under difficulties, hardship, and persecution, that this creates more godliness in us that has a payoff in the future, which we would not have to that degree if we had not endured these hardships. And that's, I think, what the writer of Hebrews is talking about. Those who went through all of these nasties, but they'll obtain a better resurrection. Now, I think that's kind of an odd concept for a lot of people. Well, if we're going to be raised with perfect bodies and we'll all be happy in heaven and everything will be great, how could one happiness be better than the other? And I'm not sure how to answer that, but the text seems to say that. So God knows, even though we don't know. So it's just something to keep in mind that here, once again, the text is very clear about the realities for Christians living in a fallen world. It's not always going to be nice, but the payoff is going to be great. Paul says in Romans 8, I do not count the sufferings of this life to bear any comparison to the glories that will follow.
So one of the things I always learned from you, Greg, and that I'm reminded of, is to be respectful and to be curious and to make sure you ask for clarifying clarifications. If someone gives you an answer that seems kind of vague, just maybe ask for clarification.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's the key to engagement in a safe and much more productive way than I've ever experienced before. And lots of people have told me the same thing about what we call the tactical approach here.
Uh-huh. So what are you working on right now? You're always busy with something.
Well, I'm just playing catch-up ball right now. I was on a interview for 5 hours and 15 minutes of original taping. It went down to 3.5 minutes. 5 hours 15 minutes went down to 3 hours and 23 minutes on a very popular podcast called Diary of a CEO.
Oh yeah,
and. Yeah, well, during that time, I spent the 5 hours. It was a 4-person discussion, but I was straight across the table from Alex O'Connor, who many of your listeners will know is probably the best known atheist in the world right now, and he's only 26 years old, and he is very sharp and not to be trifled with. So that podcast aired about 3 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago today, I think, maybe 4 weeks ago today. But there's been a lot of things that have happened as a result, and so I'm working on those kinds of things, doing a lot of podcasts and just trying to get more visibility for STR.
Sure.
Quite frankly,
yeah.
I have another book that I'll probably do, when I get around to it, kind of thing. But right now, I'm just kind of working on all the things in front of me to help build the organization. No big new projects here, except for the podcasting stuff and responding to the DOAC. Diary of a CEO podcast, but that's been going good. It's been keeping me really busy.
I will look that up tonight. I'd like to listen to that. That was Stephen Bartlett, isn't that his name?
That's right.
Yeah, Diary of a CEO. I will definitely check that out. Greg, thanks for doing the show today. I know your schedule is very busy, so I appreciate you taking time, and always great to have you on.
Well, it's always fun to be with you, Bill, so thanks so much for the invitation.
You make it fun. Greg Koukl has been my guest. You can learn more about him at str.org, standtoreason.org. We're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, Pastor Brent McDougall is going to join the show. Looking forward to having him on. We'll be right back. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support.
On the latest episode of the Wild God Stories podcast, we go to Africa.
I was raised in Sierra Leone in a community that truly lived the phrase, "It takes a village."
Until one day, the world outside Anita's village broke in.
I didn't grow up in a war zone, but I watched one unfold in the country I love.
God brought hope to her story and many others through radical provision.
God began to direct us towards Uganda, Africa.
I was born and grew up in the countryside of Ethiopia.
Nanjan I met in Kigali, Rwanda.
Discover how God showed up in the middle of war, loss, and impossible odds in Africa. Stories that'll make you say,
"Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God."
Wow, God Stories. Wherever you get your podcasts.